If obey, that let's draw what we have spoken until now. We said that to be people of God, to be a son of Abraham, we need to be examples, right? We need to give testimony of our faith. To live our lives accordingly, giving a good testimony, we need to obey God's commandments. But you can't obey God's commandments if those commandments are not written in your heart. You can't have the commandments written in stones outside of you. They need to be part of your nature. That's the key. The commandments need to be inside of you. They need to be part of your nature. Then you will obey the proper way. You will obey like God wants you to obey. Because, as I told you before, it is possible to obey God without faith, without having faith. It is possible. But if you do that, you will not be fulfilling what God wants you to fulfill by obeying the commandments. Mitzvah in Hebrew comes from the root tzivah. Tzivah means to connect, to draw near. So when you analyze Hebrew, you understand that to fulfill a mitzvah, to fulfill a commandment, it's to what? It's to draw near to God. It's to get closer to God. That's the root of the word commandment, mitzvah in Hebrew. When you obey God the proper way, the right way, you are connected to God. You connect yourself to God. You connect yourself to the divine. But it needs to be the right way. It needs to be with kavanah. You know what kavanah is? Kavanah is the proper intention of the heart. If you read Isaiah chapter 1, God rebukes the people of Israel through the prophet with very harsh words. Very harsh words. Condemning the people of Israel for keeping the mitzvot, keeping the commandments. But they were keeping the commandments without kavanah, without the proper inclination of the heart. So they were going to the temple in the appointed times. They were fasting like they were supposed to fast, but they were lying to their neighbor. They were stealing from their neighbors. They were not taking care of the widows. They were not taking care of the orphans. They were exploiting the poor people, you see. So the commandments, keeping the commandments this way does not do any good. So we need to keep the commandments the proper way. And the only way that we can keep the commandments the way God wants is when we have the commandments written in our hearts. And how do we have the commandments written in our hearts? How do we have God's law part of our nature? Only through the Son of God, the Messiah of God. Only through His work, because God announced it through Jeremiah. God told to Jeremiah that He would do a new covenant. The expression new covenant, Brit Chadashah, is not an invention of any priest or pastor or even rabbi. Brit Chadashah was a term that God used when He spoke to Jeremiah, promising Jeremiah that He will do a new covenant to the people of Israel and to the people of Judah. And this new covenant would be like this. God will take His Torah out of stones and He will write them in our hearts and in our minds, so that the people that have God's law inside them would really be the people of God. And then God says in Jeremiah chapter 31 that it will not be necessary anymore that you speak about God's law to your neighbor. Because everybody will know God. Everybody will know how to please God. And the new covenant in Yeshua, in the Messiah, accomplishes that. God writes His law in our hearts through His sacrifice, through Yeshua's sacrifice. Okay? Now, that is why Yeshua and his mission are essential to Israel and all the people of God. Only through his works we can meet the requirements to be a blessing to the families of the earth. Now, someone's Jewishness should not be measured based on the number of traditions kept or on how Jewish your last name is. The Jewishness of a Jew should be based on the type of influence that his or her life has in the lives of others. In other words, are the character and the instruction of God being seen through my life to influence others to live like me? That's essential what it is. That's what the new covenant is. You see? It's the kind of influence you have over other people. That's to be Jewish. And it's very common in Jewish circles, you know. Very common. To see how Jewish your last name is, you know. And when they want to make sure they when you introduce yourself, you know, what's your name? Oh, my name is Matheus. Matheus what? What's your last name? What's your family name? That's very important to know, because that measures how Jewish you are. But that's wrong. In my opinion, that's wrong. Because if to be Jewish is to be a light to the nations, is to be a blessing to the nations of the earth, a last name should not be enough. And it is not enough. We can't get and we can't live inside this comfort zone, you know, just because we have a Jewish father, a Jewish mother, or a Jewish grandparents, that we're okay. You know, to be Jewish, to be part of the people of God, includes responsibilities. And we are not exempt from these responsibilities. We need to fulfill them. And we fulfill them when we influence other people, when we help other people, when we are a light to other people, when we bless other people. That's the very nature of God's chosen people. You see, that's why, in my opinion, there should be no place in Judaism for prejudice, for racism. And unfortunately, that's not the case. There are a lot of prejudices and racism inside Judaism, because it's a twisted concept, you see. If we were chosen, and I talk as a Jewish believer, if we were chosen to bless other people, if the reason of me being chosen was to bless other people, should I consider myself better than the other people? It doesn't make any sense. And whenever Israel boasted on this choosing thing, you know, God spoke to them very clearly in Dvarim, Deuteronomy chapter 7, said, look, I did not choose you because you were the greatest nation or the biggest nation. On the contrary, I chose you because you were the smallest of the nations. And I had mercy on you. So that's important to fight against this kind of feeling that we're better people. You know, and it's not only on the Jewish part. You know, I know many believers that consider themselves chosen, and they have a place in heaven. They have a house in heaven, a place already guaranteed for them. So they act like a little, you know, they're proud of themselves. They like, you know, their life. They don't worry about other people. They don't worry about speaking about God's law to other people. You know, they're very comfort. You know, they already have salvation. Why should they care? You know, so it's not a good thing. And the Apostle Paul, Rav Shaul, in Romans chapter 4, he says that the real Jew is not the one that has Abraham's blood, but is the one that walks in Abraham's footsteps. That's the real Jew. The same Apostle Paul also uses a very Interesting expression, the circumcision of heart, of the heart. You see, the real Jew is the one that is circumcised in the heart. What does it mean? The Torah says that. Already in the Old Testament, God says the same thing to Moses. What is to be circumcised in your heart? Is to have God's law inside of you. It's to love God out of your heart. Because you know, in the end, that's what counts. What you have in your heart, that's what counts to God. What God is really interested in is that you seek Him with all your heart. That you get closer to Him. Maybe the big things that we do for God, but without the proper heart, will not be counted. And the small things you do, but with your heart, those things, you know, they are counted by God. They are seen by God. They are taken into account. That's the most important thing.